What was your paranormal experience? When I was in high school, my friend called me at 2 a.m. Knowing what an insomniac I was, he assumed I'd be the only one awake when we had to be at school in 5 hours. He told me that he and his dad had gotten into an argument earlier before he went to bed. He said his dad always comes to comfort him in his room after they have big fights. So when he woke up in the middle of the night and saw the outline of a man sitting on the edge of his bed, he assumed it was his dad that felt bad for yelling earlier. He said, "Dad?" But the shadow didn't move. He yelled, "Dad?" And again, there was no movement. So he shook his feet at the end of the bed to move him or to at least hit him with the blanket to get his attention. When the blanket went all the way up, he was worried because that meant there was nothing on the bed. And then he was terrified because the shadow man wasn't there anymore. I figured he was just half asleep and seeing things. I think we've all had that feeling waking up. But he was so scared, he left his house and was sitting outside on his porch. He lived in a neighborhood not far from my house, so I said I'd drive over and we'd smoke some Calaxian about it. When I got there, he was visibly shaken, but I got him to calm down eventually and convince him he was seeing things. We smoked a couple blunts and he went inside. While I was leaving, I dropped my lighter and it fell behind me. When I turned around, in the top right window of his house, his room, I saw a man. I thought maybe it was his dad hearing us smoke downstairs, but when I looked closer, it wasn't his dad. Then I thought, oh my god, maybe there's a stranger in their house. And I was freaking out a little bit. But then the man turned to his right, moving more to the center of the window, and completely disappeared in front of my eyes. I never told anyone including him because, A, the only person who would believe me would be him and that would only scare him more, B, people will just say, oh, you were high. Why would we believe that? I had a pretty high tolerance in high school, and anyone who has smoked Calaxian knows it's not going to make you see a man in a window for over 15 seconds. Moved into a 1950 1.5-story bungalow when our youngest son was about 8 months old. Our bedroom was upstairs, and his bedroom was right at the bottom of the stairs, so we could hear him easily if he needed anything. No baby monitor. He was a good sleeper and slept through the night without interruption most nights. But in the new house, he started to cry briefly, like a single wail or two in the middle of the night about once or twice a week. It was brief but loud and my wife or I would go down and check on him. He was always peacefully sleeping. We chalked it up to the baby equivalent of talking in his sleep. This went on for several months, and we got so used to it that we stopped going down to even check on him unless we heard more than just a single wail or two because we knew he was fine and just crying in his sleep. About 4 months into this, my wife took the kids to her mom's for a 3-day weekend, and I stayed home because of work. That night, in the house all by myself, I heard the crying again. I did not sleep of all the rest of that night and hardly at all the rest of the weekend. I seem to have this sixth sense. IDK. For example, let's say I'm going to a particular location. I'll say a house. The closer that I get to the house, the more energy I feel. I like to say the atmosphere changes. I'm talking like I can start feeling good or bad vibes the closer I get to the house. The bad vibes feel like a heavy presence coming over me. I would say almost like a heavy fog or a weight on my chest. I remember one time I refused to even step foot into a home because the atmosphere was so heavy and I felt so much dread from the street that I had to go back home. My first paranormal experience happened to me when I was in the 3rd grade. To preface, I live in Pennsylvania, so this took place in Pittsburgh. We were staying in the William Penn Hotel in the middle of the city. The atmosphere felt off, but I was too young to really pinpoint it or realize what was going on. I went to use the bathroom before going to bed. I did my business, started to wash my hands, but when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see my reflection. Instead, I saw a pale-skinned woman with black hair and black eye sockets for eyes. I ran out of that bathroom so fast. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I've been to Gettysburg, and that place is super haunted. I was grabbed and scratched in the Jenny Wade house. We ate at the Dobbin House Tavern later that day. I excused myself to the restroom. As I'm standing at the urinal, I hear the stall door next to me slam shut. I then proceeded to hear the laughter of a little child. When I asked the waitress if the place was haunted, I could see the blood drain from her face. My grandmother's house was extremely haunted. I'm talking demonic type things. In the middle of the night, you would hear heavy footsteps coming up the basement stairs. Occasionally, you would hear pounding behind the closet door in the back bedroom above the garage. One night, we were bringing my grandmother down for the holidays, and that was the night I felt pure evil. About 30 minutes out, I started to feel a very heavy presence. It got worse the closer we got. We pull up to the house and it's unbearable. It felt like the house was watching us. We get into the house and I'm having a really hard time breathing. That night, I felt pure evil. I could feel something in the darkness looking at us, stalking us as we moved throughout the house. All I felt was pure evil and hatred. Finally, last summer, my entire family went to the beach. I had to stay behind to watch the dog because, well, it was my dog and my responsibility. This meant I had the house to myself for a week. Anyway, the first 4 nights are normal, but the 5th night, things changed. In the middle of the night, I hear the Alexa in the kitchen say, "Sorry, I can't understand that." And then soft piano music playing. The next night, the same thing. The night after, the same thing. I later found out that the previous owner died in the home and loved piano music. I lived in a flat in an old hotel. The building dated back to the 1800s, and there had been previous buildings there for at least another century. I always had the feeling of being watched by something negative when I was on my own and was generally creeped out. One night, I woke up and there was a little girl that stood next to my bed, wearing boots that were too big for her and absolutely dripping wet. She was watching me sleep and then said, "He drowned me in the bath," before disappearing. Another night, I was aware of a presence in the corner. After a little while, I saw a young boy who looked really badly burned and just trying to hide away. A few seconds later, he was gone. Eventually, I got a couple of spiritualists in because it was stopping me from feeling safe in my home. They told me the previous landlord was still there and he had hurt people during his life. They also told me he kept 2 children with him in spirit so he could carry on hurting them. I hadn't mentioned any specifics to them. When they cleared the place, they told the children to stand by me, and I'd swear, I felt them take my hands. After they dealt with the negative one, they helped the children move on. There was a real sense of peace once they were finished. I've no idea whether any of it was real or if I was somehow imagining all of my experiences, but I certainly slept better once the spiritualists had done their thing. When I was young, our family would move around quite a lot, so I have lived in many houses. One of them was particularly memorable. There was nothing ominous or out of the ordinary about how it looked. But I would have many nightmares while living there, and a lot of them would be about being in the house. For example, I would dream about being in my room or the kitchen or some other room, whilst an angry woman walked back and forth outside the window, banging on the glass and demanding to be let in. Or, I would be in my bed in my dream, and a dark face would float above me. A lot of sleep paralysis episodes while living there too, with images of a woman coming in my room to angrily straddle me. I also had a bad feeling about the corner of the wall above my bed, where the face was in my dream, but couldn't explain why. In the beginning, I attributed these dreams to depression, but the dreams were so persistent, and they had to do with the house so often that I began to think maybe it was haunted. Several years later, our family had to move yet again because the landlord's elderly wife had passed away and the landlord wanted the house back to live in. First time having to move due to a death, and I felt like this was also somehow connected to the haunting. After moving, I didn't have any nightmare problems and I forgot about the house for a while, but in a random conversation with my brother, I offhandedly remarked that I always thought that house was haunted. He froze and looked at me with surprise because he too had thought it haunted while living there. He said he would hear voices at night, whispering gibberish into his ear, and developed a habit of sleeping under the covers, with his ears covered due to it. We had never discussed our individual experiences at the time, and the fact that we both thought it haunted is proof in my eyes that it truly was. I go to a very small private school. And when I say small, it's small. About 150 students go to the school. It's also a school that's K-12, so that gives you some background info of how small this school is. I was in 6th grade when this happened. My English classroom is on the 4th floor. The 4th floor always creeped me out because there were so many rumors of it being haunted. I was walking up the stairs, alone, to get to class. I was also running a couple minutes late because I had an orthodontist appointment in the morning. When I reached the top of the stairs, I suddenly felt this gust of wind pass by me. No windows were open, by the way. The wind made me fall down about halfway down the stairs. My head started to ache horribly and I passed out. But while I was passed out, I was still a bit conscious. This is a really hard story to explain, so just bear with me. I kept on feeling heavy breathing on my neck. mumbling and groaning in my ear, and occasionally chills down my spine. I woke up and I saw the most horrible figure standing over me. It looked like a goat. But it was standing on all fours, had big black eyes, was drooling over me, and had long razor-sharp teeth. I saw that thing for only a second. And when I stood up, I immediately ran to my classroom. Everyone looked at me because I was 20 minutes late, and I had a fearful look on my face. Nonetheless, the teacher excused me because he knew I had an appointment. But he asked me why I had a big bruise on my leg and arm. I looked down, and the bruises were huge. I said that I fell, which is the truth. He just nodded and told me to sit down. I've never told this story to anyone in fear of them not believing me, but it feels good to get this off my chest.